Last night we saw the San Francisco Opera performance of Dialogues of the Carmelites, and it was an amazing performance, deeply moving. And we sat next to the singer Fredericavonstade. And during the intermission, the director of San Francisco Opera, Matthew Schilbach, asked her, he said, you've sung this part of Blanche in Dialogues of the Carmelites. Did you find yourself singing along quietly as you were hearing this? And she said she had long forgotten the words, but that she was tapping her foot to the rhythms. In many ways, it's a very easy opera to describe. The summary of it is really simple. A young woman is relatively nervous and fearful. Her carriage, she's a noble person of noble descent living in revolutionary era France. Her little carriage is surrounded by a massive mob who upset her. She gets back to her family house, and she tells her father that she wants to join a convent. She wants to become a nun. And she's looking for refuge from the scariness and the chaos of the world. And so she does go and she joins the monastery. And the first friend that she makes there is another young novice who's like herself. Her name is Constance. And Constance is just one of the most lovely characters in opera. Constance is a joyful, kind, thoughtful person who just doesn't take things too seriously. Constance is somebody who's not at all afraid of death. And Constance even tells Blanche, the main character, Constance says, we are both going to die young, and we're going to die on the same day. So anyway, the abbess, the person in charge of the convent, takes Blanche under her wing, and she herself is very ill, and she dies a terrible death, tormented by pains and fears, but at the same time, she gives Blanche a blessing. And so Blanche is part of the life of this convent, and then as the revolution heats up, the revolutionaries close the convent, and before they can lock all the nuns into a prison, Blanche escapes and becomes a servant in her old family house. So all the nuns are going to be executed. They're going to be sentenced to death by guillotine. And the last scene in the opera, all of them are singing together in this beautiful chorus. And as each one is killed, another voice is cut out. And at the very last minute, when Constance is about to be executed herself, her friend Blanche courageously comes and makes eye contact with her and joins her. And Blanche, this woman who'd been so frightened of everything, has this incredible moment of courage in being able to walk forward to the guillotine to her own death. It's really an extraordinary opera. I recommend it so highly to you, but I want to point out two really important things about it. The first is there's just such an obvious contrast between the world of women, the world of the monastery, where they have very high and demanding rules and challenging rules, and yet they're so forgiving of each other when they fail to live up to the rules. They look out for each other. They're compassionate with one another. They have empathy for one another. And the contrast between that and the world of men, the revolutionaries, who will want to change society so badly that they don't care who they will kill in order to do it. And one of the most wonderful parts of the opera is when Blanche goes to the Mother Superior and says, I'm coming here for refuge. And the Mother Superior explains to her, she says, this is not a place of refuge. This is a place of prayer. And it's so true for all of us. There is nothing that is cut off completely from the world, even though we want to create little circles of perfection, little communities where everything is good. What happens in the world, what happened among the nuns, when their goodness and their kindness to another becomes part of the world, and what happened among the revolutionaries, their violence and their hatred also affected them. So there's no place that is cut off separate from everything else. The last thing that I wanted to point out has to do with death. Constance used this wonderful image. She said that death is like a jacket that is tailored and fit perfectly for us. And she said, well, what would happen if you went to the coat check and you checked your jacket and the coat that you got back, the death that you got back, was a different one than the one that you had gone in with? What if it was a jacket that had sleeves that were too small, or one that was just too big for you? And the idea was that somehow the Mother Superior, in her terrible death, gave her friend Blanche a chance to have a more beautiful death. And this is one of the most difficult things about Christianity for me. The idea that someone's death can be a sacrificial death, that it can somehow change what we can experience. In many ways, what Jesus did is by living a life dedicated to the idea that all people are beloved by God without exception, and then living a life where he wasn't afraid of death, and then going to his own death, gives us a chance to live our lives in joy and in love without being afraid, without being held back by fear. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco, California. Thanks for watching More Good News.